An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's a room that barely deserves the name. 4 walls, a low ceiling, cables across the floor, amplifiers pushed to the edge of collapse. No screens, no coloured lights, no production. 3 people picked up guitars not long ago and play them as if they never learned the rules, because in many ways they chose not to. The drums don't build up or ease you in. They just start, no ceremony. The voice isn't trying to captivate or move you with subtlety. It's trying to say something, right now, with everything it has. That image isn't just the beginning of something, it's the most honest definition of what punk was, and what it keeps being every time it comes back. To understand why that kind of energy emerged, you have to look at the moment it happened. In the mid-70s, in cities like London and New York, tension had been building with very few outlets. In the UK, unemployment was hitting working-class youth hard. Institutions weren't responding. The gap between the people making decisions and the people living with them kept growing. And in that same moment, the music that was supposed to speak to human experience had drifted far from it. Stages were massive, productions were expensive. The most recognized musicians lived in worlds that had little to do with the street. There was an excess of form and a shortage of urgency. Punk didn't emerge as a carefully developed proposal or a neatly written manifesto. It emerged as a visceral reaction to that distance. When a generation feels that what it hears doesn't represent it, that what it sees on stage feels foreign, that music has become a spectacle to admire from a distance rather than a way to express something real. What shows up isn't an alternative theory. What shows up is noise, urgency, the need to pick up an instrument without asking permission, without years of technique, without waiting for someone to decide you're good enough to speak. The simplicity that defines punk from its earliest forms isn't carelessness, it's a stance. When someone chooses not to decorate, not to soften, not to polish, they're choosing to let the content arrive without mediation. 2 or 3 chords aren't a limitation imposed by someone who doesn't know better. They're the decision not to hide behind complexity. The speed isn't an accident either. There's something in the pace of punk that reflects exactly the emotional temperature of whoever is playing it. There's no room for hesitation, for ornamentation, for decorative pauses. There's an emotion that needs out right now, without the filter that would make it more tolerable or more palatable for anyone who prefers things to be less uncomfortable. The roughness of the sound serves the same purpose. A voice that scratches, a guitar that distorts without correction, a recording that doesn't hide its jagged edges. All of it communicates something a polished production never could. It communicates that what's being said is real, that it wasn't prepared to be liked, that it's not looking for the listener's approval but speaking to whoever already feels the same way. Punk doesn't persuade, it recognizes. When someone living through a certain discomfort hears a sound with exactly that raw, immediate texture, they don't need an explanation. They already get it. One of the most powerful things this music put into circulation was a new idea about who gets to make it. Before punk, the chain was pretty clear. You needed training, expensive instruments, access to studios, approval from labels, distribution deals. Punk cut that chain at several points at once, and not just musically, but culturally. The idea that anyone can pick up a guitar, learn the basics in a few days, get together with friends, record in a small space, press a few copies of a record, and go play without anyone's authorization changed something fundamental in the relationship between people and music. It didn't just make creating more accessible, it changed the core question. Instead of asking whether you're good enough to make music, the question became what you want to say and how urgently you need to say it. That logic of autonomy and self-determination built something that goes far beyond the sounds themselves. Punk scenes created networks of independent venues, their own labels, hand-printed zines, circuits of small room shows. Not because they couldn't access bigger platforms, but because they deliberately chose a model where control stayed close, where the message didn't get diluted on its way to mass distribution. That cultural decision had consequences still felt decades later across nearly all independent music. The idea that it's possible to build a scene without depending on outside structures, that community can sustain what the market won't guarantee. The punk attitude isn't just an aesthetic or a mood, it's an ethic. A way of approaching creation that puts urgency above perfection, honesty above technique, presence above spectacle. In punk, there's an implicit demand not to perform, not to produce something for the sake of looking good, not to calculate impact before saying it. That ethic crossed generations and entire genres. Musicians who never played a note of punk adopted that production logic, that direct relationship with sound, that distrust of anything that added too much distance between the emotion and whoever was hearing it. Punk also wasn't a single-place phenomenon. Even though its most documented forms came out of cities in the English-speaking world, that energy found fertile ground in very different contexts. In Latin America, in Asia, in Eastern Europe, in cities where the social tension was different, but the need to speak with urgency was the same, punk took on local shapes that often had little to do with the genre's most recognizable images. What stayed constant was the impulse. When faced with a situation that produces discomfort, anger, or exclusion, there's a musical form that doesn't try to soften it, but names it with every bit of energy available. The influence of punk on popular culture isn't measured only in how many genres sounded similar afterward. It's measured in how many artists, communities, and scenes adopted its way of relating to creation. Punk fashion was one of the first cases of a youth culture building its aesthetic from the street up, using everyday or discarded materials, turning the industrial or the worn down into a symbol of identity. The independent production model that dominates much of contemporary music has one of its clearest antecedents in punk. The idea that a recording doesn't need to sound perfect to say something true is still operating in musical forms that appear to have no connection at all to that 70s sound. Every time music feels like it's drifted too far from something essential, an impulse surfaces that recovers the punk logic even without using the name. The urgency to speak without decoration, to strip the sound down to what actually matters, to restore the most direct connection between the person playing and what they need to say. That need doesn't disappear. Punk wasn't a one-time explosion that burned out. It was proof that there is a permanent tension between music that chases scale, production, and approval, and music that simply needs to say something right now. There's something deeply human in that urgency, in the need to speak before the moment passes, to make noise before you're ready enough, to find in discomfort not a reason to go quiet, but a reason to turn it up. Punk didn't just speed up music. It gave a lot of people back the certainty that it was still possible to say something without asking permission, without waiting to be validated, without softening what needed to sound rough. That certainty has no expiration date, and as long as there's something urgent left to say, punk will remain the most honest way to say it.